welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to be doing the book addiction tag, which sounds like a fun tag just because I feel like if you have a booktube channel you probably have to admit you have at least somewhat of a book addiction. And I was recently watching Rose K. Reed's video on this. In the description there is a link for that. And I was thinking, this sounds like fun, I might do this, and then she tagged me in it, so, well, I'm like, I have to do it now. So, let's get into the tag. Question 1, what is the longest amount of time you are comfortable without picking up a book? So, the most extreme, probably, I would go is maybe a couple of days, and that has only been in times where I was super burned out from reading just a ton of stuff or something I didn't really like. Most times I have a book and read a book several times throughout the day. That's where I work from home right now because of the whole pandemic, and so I typically will read on my breaks, on my lunch, and so if I was in the office, it would probably be the work day. I wouldn't actually have a book. Granted, you know, when you have some things on your phone or something too, you can always read there, but so it's a pretty short amount of time overall. Number 2, how many books do you carry with you at a given time? Typically, if I leave the house, I like to make sure I have a book with me. My wife always makes fun of me, but the only couple of handful of times I've forgotten to bring a book, we'll end up having to wait for something, or there'll be something that'll happen where there's a solid 10 minutes I could have been reading a book. So I always at least bring one. I don't usually bring more than that. I do have some ebooks on my phone. I'll read from time to time, getting through, but I mean, even when I was doing my Stormlight reread, I carried a Stormlight book with me everywhere. It's easier with smaller books, but there's always at least one that I'm going to have with me. Number 3, do you keep every book that you get, or are you okay to pass them along to make more space? I do keep most of the books I get. The only time I usually get rid of books is if I just really, really didn't like it, and I'm pretty sure that I will never have a desire to read it again. Keeping books, a really important part of that is reread value. For example, Wheel of Time I have reread so many times, and I've reread a lot of the Brandon Sanderson books and just other books that I really like, I have done, and other books I have that I plan to do a reread of that I haven't yet, like Malazan, so that's really important to me. So if it's a book I didn't enjoy, I know I'm never going to read again, I usually will sell those back to my used bookstore or something like that so that somebody else who might enjoy them can then get them that way. I don't want to hoard a bunch of books I don't even like, so that's usually when I get rid, but I tend to try to be careful, and if I don't think I'm going to like a book, I won't typically buy it. So most books I read I do enjoy and to keep around, so I don't get rid of a ton. Number 4, how long do you typically spend in a bookshop per visit? So my wife would say too long. I'm not that bad. It does help that my local half-price books, they have a 30-minute time limit that you can be in there, especially when they're busy. Because they limit the number of people in the store with all the pandemic stuff. But, so that helps. But with there too, I used to spend longer because I like to browse. I will, if there's certain books I'm looking for, I'll try to find those books, but I just like to kind of look through no matter any store I'm at. And pre-pandemic, whenever I was in any store that has books, I look. I've gotten books in dollar stores. Heck, I got a book at Menards, which is like a Home Depot if you don't have Menards reading, but they had just a random thing of books they had one time, and I got a fantasy book there, and I'm like, cool, all right. So I check any thrift stores I like to look through. I've kind of cut back on visits I don't need. Going to the bookstore at least occasionally is, I feel like, a need for me. This is the book addiction video. I feel like that's fair to say. But my bookstore, the one nearby me, I've been there enough times and looked through what they have that oftentimes I'm kind of scanning for new stuff or stuff I haven't seen before to look there. So it does cut back my time, but it's still usually a pretty healthy amount of time that I spend. Question 5. How much time do you actually spend reading a day? I would say usually at least a couple of hours. The biggest chunk I read when I get into bed for the night before I actually go to sleep. I'll read usually for a pretty good chunk of time. That's just an every night thing for me. What I'll normally do throughout the day, I do read when I'm on, if it's a weekday, when I'm on breaks for work or on my lunch, I'll read here and there too. So usually a bit during the day, more of it at night before I go to bed. So it usually ends up being at least a couple of hours per work day. If it's a weekend or I just have like a particular amount of downtime on a given day, then probably more, but that's kind of, I would say, normal for me. Number 6, where does picking up a book come on your to-do list? So in the last question, I just commented that I do read until I go to sleep. So when I wake up, I grab my glasses, I grab my book, and then I'm dressed and out the door into my office, working from home. So it's one of the very first things I grab and make sure that I have first thing in the morning. I don't necessarily read right away, but I grab that book right away. Number 7, how many books do you think you have? So most of my books do fit on these. I have an overflow shelf. It's definitely over 100, maybe like 200-ish. I don't know. I haven't actually counted for the most part. I'm constantly getting new books to, since I live close to a used bookstore. I like to get new books often, so I'm gonna guess around there, and I don't think that's terribly unreasonable. So that's the number that we're gonna go with. Number 8, forgot what number we were on for a minute here. Number 8, how often do you bring up books in conversation? So I haven't known or come into contact regularly with that many people who are big readers, and if they are also fantasy readers, which is primarily what I read. So typically I might try to bring up books, but I had a hard time with it because I didn't know that many people who did. Now though, I have this lovely booktube channel where I get to talk to all of you about books. And I assume if you're watching this video, you do actually care about books. And if you're watching my video, probably about fantasy books. So it's really nice. And not too long ago, started a Discord. Check the link in the description for the Discord if you want to join and also talk about books. So that's really nice. I actually get to talk about books throughout the day, all the time, with people who also enjoy the same kind of things. And it's really nice. And it prevents me from constantly bringing up books to people who don't care. Instead, I get to talk about people or with people who do. So it's really nice. And that's one of my favorite things about having the YouTube channel, having the Discord, just getting to talk books. I love talking about books. And so having other people to talk to who also love talking about books is really awesome. And I enjoy it. Number 9, what is the biggest book that you have read? So as you can see, I like a lot of pretty big books. If we're talking just page count, though, I think that would probably be my unabridged Monte Cristo. So if we include the footnotes, which I do include because I read them, 1276 is the pages in this, which is my old, still honestly holding up pretty well for how long I've had this and how many times I have read this. But this is my Penguin Classics unabridged Count of Monte Cristo. Very important because I really would love to have like a nice hardcover copy of this. And side note, I was actually in a Barnes & Noble the other day, which I rarely am in the new bookstore, but I was there. And they had this really nice looking copy, but it was abridged. And I know I'm not going to read the abridged when I have the unabridged. And so I'm kind of torn. This one, though, I really like my unabridged Monte Cristo. So really long. I have read several times. It's one of my favorite novels of all time. And outside of fantasy, I think definitely I can say favorite non-fantasy novel of all time. Love it, and I want that unabridged. I want as much of Dumas' writing as I can get for this book. So that definitely probably would be the biggest, if we're talking page count, size-wise, pick a hardcover. You know, those are all pretty large. Once I read Memory Star of Thorn, the third book I actually think will be the longest, though, because I know that's supposed to be insanely long. So we'll see. Once I get there, and the answer will change. 10. What is a book that you just have to have against all odds? So that would probably have to be the leather-bound editions of Sanderson's books that he puts out. I would absolutely love to have those. I'd love to have Wheel of Time and Sanderson books leather-bound, but they're so expensive, and I don't have any of them for that reason. But if against the odds, I do end up being able to get a set of them for basically, whatever Sanderson releases or Wheel of Time, I think they did Eye of the World. I don't know if they did the whole series ever in leather, but those are the things I'd really love to have. I don't. I've seen them. Daniel Green did a video where he looked at all of them, and they are just beautiful, and I would love to have those as someone who collects books, but it's very unlikely that I'll have them just based on the cost. Let's see, number 11. I'm going to stop doing fingers because I don't have any more. Do you have a book that you struggle to finish because you refuse to DNF? So, I would have to say the book that always comes to mind is Rhapsody by Elizabeth Hayden. That book broke me, and I read about 400 out of the 600 total pages, and I hated it, and I wasn't enjoying it, and I was just forcing myself to continue. And that was the book that made me decide it's okay to DNF, because I could not force myself to read the last 200 pages of that book. I hated it just so much. If you want to know why, I do have a full rant review. My most disliked video, apparently it's an unpopular opinion, but I hated that book so much. It's one of the worst things I have ever read. And like I said, it's what caused me to actually start DNFing. I had never DNF'd a book prior to that book. That's the one that did it. So you can check. I'll link to that one too, just in case. So 12, what are your 3 main book goals for this year? So I don't really do a whole lot of like reading goals. My kind of overarching things I just like to think about is trying to read more of the newer releases. I don't read a ton of new release books, besides like I pre-order pretty much everything Brandon Sanderson writes. But I'm trying to get better about reading newer books. And at the same time, the exact opposite, I've made it really a goal to read a lot of older, more classic fantasy books that I haven't. There's so much in fantasy, and I know a lot of people will do like, oh, it's a goal to read non-fantasy, but kind of the way I look at it is fantasy is my favorite, and there is more fantasy that exists already than I could read in a lifetime. So I don't really want to spend a ton of time reading other genres. And I do occasionally. I'm not saying other genres are bad, but fantasy is my favorite. There is so much there to read, and I've found through the last year, I found so many really great book series that have been around for so long that I had just never read that are great. So I really like to get to more of that. So keeping up with the new stuff, also having a really good appreciation of the older, those are kind of the 2 main things that I look for. So that's not really 3, but that's kind of, I guess, for book goals about as far as I go. I don't usually really do anything more specific. Number 13, have you had the pleasure of converting somebody into a reader? And I have really tried. I have tried and failed many times with people, but actually kind of recently I went to visit a friend. He had moved and I hadn't seen his new place. And we were walking around in his house, and he had in the mass market paperback the first 3 Wheel of Time books sitting out on a shelf, and he's never really been a reader, so I saw them and I was so happy. And he did admit that it was from me talking about Wheel of Time very much too much that he bought them. So that goes back to how often you bring up books in conversation. That was many years. I've known him a long time, many years before I had an outlet like this for my book conversation. So I was super happy. I always try to convince people to read The Wheel of Time if they haven't. There's actually a lot of fantasy fans who haven't read The Wheel of Time, so I do push that series quite a lot because it's my favorite. So that's still something that I do try to get people. I have gotten other people to read it, I will say. So last one, 14. What do books mean to you in 5 words? And that's kind of a weird question, but let's see. So, I gotta go. It's fine. Stories come alive in paper. That sounds pretty pithy. That's what we'll go with. That's my books. 5 words. I just really like books. I love to read. I love to dig into new worlds and new authors and new time periods. It's just something I've really always enjoyed, and I really much do enjoy. So there you have it. That is the book addiction tag. Once again, you can find Rose K Reads video in the description down below. She's the one who tagged me in this to do it. If you're watching this and want to do it, I just generally tag you as the masses. It's really fun to hear what people's responses are to these questions, and that's why I've continued to do the tag videos, just because they're fun for me, and I really like to see what other people think as well. So you are thusly tagged. Don't forget to give this video a like, and if you do want to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.